in which the last dangling threads of our story play out in the aftermath of Anna's death. Part 8, Chapter 1. Nearly 2 months had gone by. It was already the middle of the hot summer, and Sergei Ivanovitch was only now preparing to leave Moscow. During that time, Sergei Ivanovitch had his own events going on in his life. His book, the fruit of 6 years of toil, entitled An Essay and Survey of the Principles and Forms of Statehood in Europe and Russia, had been finished a year ago. Some sections of the book and the introduction had been printed in a periodical publication, and other parts had been read by Sergei Ivanovitch to people of his circle, so that the ideas of the work could no longer be quite new to the public. But all the same, Sergei Ivanovitch expected the appearance of the book to make a serious impression in society and cause, if not a revolution in scholarship, at least a great stir in the scholarly world. This book, after careful polishing, had been published last year and sent out to the booksellers. Asking no one about it, responding with reluctance and feigned indifference to his friends' questions about how the book was doing, not even asking the booksellers how the sales were, Sergei Ivanovitch watched keenly and with strained attention for the first impression his book would make in society and in literature. But a week went by, a second, a third, and there was no noticeable impression in society. His friends, the specialists and scholars, sometimes mentioned it, evidently out of politeness, but his other acquaintances, not interested in a book of learned content, did not speak to him about it at all. And in society, which especially now was busy with other things, there was a complete indifference. In literature, too, for a whole month, there was not a word about the book. Sergei Ivanovitch calculated in detail the time needed to write a review. But a month went by, then another, and there was the same silence. Only in the Northern Beetle, in a humorous feuilleton about the singer Drabanti, who had lost his voice, were a few scornful words said in passing about Koznishev's book, indicating that it had long since been condemned by all and handed over to general derision. Finally, in the third month, a critical article appeared in a serious journal. Sergei Ivanovitch knew the author of the article. He had met him once at Golubtsov's. The author was a very young and sickly feuilletonist, quite pert as a writer, but with extremely little education and timid in his personal relations. Despite his complete contempt for the author, Sergei Ivanovitch set about with complete respect to read the article. The article was terrible. The feuilletonist had obviously understood the whole book deliberately in a way in which it could not possibly be understood. But he had selected his quotations so cleverly that for those who had not read the book, and obviously almost no one had read it, it was completely clear that the whole book was nothing but a collection of high-flown words, which were also used inappropriately. This was indicated by question marks, and that the author of the book was a completely ignorant man. And it was all so witty that Sergei Ivanovitch would not have minded displaying such wit himself. That was the terrible thing. Despite the complete conscientiousness with which Sergei Ivanovitch tested the correctness of the reviewer's arguments, he did not linger for a moment over the shortcomings and mistakes that were being ridiculed. It was too obvious that it had all been selected on purpose, but at once began involuntarily to recall in the smallest detail his meeting and conversation with the author of the article. Did I offend him in some way? Sergei Ivanovitch asked himself. And remembering that, when they had met, he had corrected the young man in the use of a word that showed his ignorance, he found the explanation of the article's meaning. After this article came a dead silence, both printed and oral, about the book, and Sergei Ivanovitch saw that his work of 6 years, elaborated with such love and effort, had gone by without leaving a trace. His situation was the more difficult because once he finished the book, he no longer had the intellectual work that formerly had taken up the greater part of his time. Sergei Ivanovitch was intelligent, educated, healthy, energetic, and did not know where to apply his energy. Conversations in drawing rooms, conferences, meetings, committees, wherever one could talk, took up part of his time. But as an inveterate city dweller, he did not allow himself to be totally consumed by talking, as his inexperienced brother did when he was in Moscow. He was still left with considerable leisure and mental force. Fortunately for him, at this most trying time of his book's failure, the questions of racial minorities, American friends, famine in Samara, the exposition, and Spiritism came to be replaced by the Slavic question, previously only smoldering in society. And Sergei Ivanovitch, one of those who had previously raised this question, gave himself wholly to it. In the milieu to which Sergei Ivanovitch belonged, nothing else was talked or written about at that time but the Slavic question and the Serbian War. All that was an idle crowd usually does to kill time was now done for the benefit of the Slavs. Balls, concerts, dinners, speeches, ladies' dresses, beer, taverns, all bore witness to his sympathy with the Slavs. With much of what was said and written on this subject, Sergei Ivanovitch did not agree in detail. He saw that the Slavic question had become one of those fashionable fads which, supplanting one another, always serve as a subject of concern for society. He also saw that there were many people who concerned themselves with it for vain, self-interested purposes. He recognized that the newspapers printed a great many useless and exaggerated things with one aim, to draw attention to themselves and outshout the rest. He saw that in this general upsurge of society, the ones who leaped to the forefront and shouted louder than the rest were all the failures and the aggrieved, commanders-in-chief without armies, ministers without ministries, journalists without journals, party chiefs without partisans. He saw that much here was frivolous and ridiculous, but he also saw and recognized the unquestionable, ever-growing enthusiasm which united all classes of society, with which one could not but sympathize. The slaughter of co-religionists and brother Slavs awakened sympathy for the sufferers and indignation against the oppressors, and the heroism of the Serbs and the Montenegrins, fighting for a great cause, generated in the whole nation a desire to help their brothers, not in word now, but in deed. But with that came another phenomenon that made Sergei Ivanovitch rejoice. This was the manifestation of public opinion. Society definitely expressed its wish. The nation's soul was given expression, as Sergei Ivanovitch liked to put it, and the more involved he became in it, the more obvious it seemed to him that this was a cause that would attain vast proportions, that would mark an epoch. He devoted himself completely to the service of the great cause, and forgot all about his book. His time was now wholly taken up, so that he was even unable to respond to all the letters and requests addressed to him. Having spent the entire spring and part of the summer working, it was only in the month of July that he decided to go to his brother's in the country. He was going for a 2-week rest in the very holy of holies of the people, the depths of the country, there to revel in the sight of that upsurge, popular spirit, of which he and all the inhabitants of the capital and other cities were fully convinced. Katavasov, who had long wanted to fulfill his promise to visit Levine, went with him. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.